If you missed Tuesday's vice presidential debate and only caught a news recap of it, you might get the impression that this was yet another litigation of the 2020 election and January 6th, and J.D. Vance could not answer a simple and direct question about it.
In what was the night's most contentious exchange, Vance refused to acknowledge that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election.
I would just ask that, did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
Even though the whole thing otherwise was just a parade of Walz non-answers, and even though by polling, nobody cares about January 6th and fighting about the 2020 election anymore. To Vance's point, they care about fixing the massive problems we have right now: the economy, immigration, crime, and foreign war. But most importantly, even though the edit in that segment was strategically made with precision, because cutting Vance's commentary right at that particular moment achieved two things. One, it cut off Vance's actual answer to the question. And two, it avoided a follow-up question that completely exposed Walz on his precious democracy-themed values. He either doesn't understand them and therefore is unqualified to defend them, or he's intentionally hostile to them, so he is the threat that he and his party focus their campaign on warning about. Right after that news segment cut the clip, J.D. Vance did answer the question about the 2020 election.
Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further.
And frankly, anyone who doesn't have any questions about 2020 didn't pay attention to it, because we voted in ways in that election that we never have before in the history of the country. 2/3 of people voted by mail or an early method other than a polling place in 2020. By contrast, only 1/4 of voters did that in 2016 and 2018. It was the first time in American history that a majority of voters did not cast their ballots in person on Election Day. So what are the odds that we did it exactly right in our first attempt at doing it on this scale? And even if we did, there was all the information meddling beforehand, too. The true story of Hunter Biden's laptop broke in late October, and it was suppressed at the will of government officials who insisted it was a fabrication of Russian propaganda, until the same feds finally admitted it was completely authentic, well after the election was over. Well, not all the same feds, actually, because some of them still refuse to acknowledge that they were wrong, which tells you exactly how much they actually care about the truth and your right to have it when you vote. But information about a corruption scandal involving one of the candidates was controlled and censored in a way that certainly could have influenced enough votes to change the outcome of the election. It is foolish not to have any questions about these oddities and interventions, because they are unprecedented and abnormal. They are the deviation from American democracy, not the norm. But on that censorship theme, by cutting that debate clip right where they did, this news coverage completely ignores the follow-up. If we actually do care so much about foundational American values, then why was the Biden-Harris White House working closely with social media companies to suppress the speech of the American citizen, as they did early and often, as described openly at their own podium?
We're flagging problematic posts for Facebook that spread disinformation. J.D.
Vance aggressively made the case. If you care so much about democratic values, then why did this administration and this guy personally trash the most important of those values?
You guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds.
Oh, no, it's not censorship. It's just taking down threats and hate speech. Several points to break down there. No, neither the White House nor Tim Walz were dealing with threats when they were working to take down citizen social media posts or advocating for it. The White House was targeting COVID opinions they didn't like, and that Tim Walz quote that J.D. Vance referenced is from a 2022 MSNBC segment in which he said there is no First Amendment right to misinformation, not threats or incitement of crime.
There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy.
There, of course, is a First Amendment right to misinformation, which isn't even a legal term because under the First Amendment, the government does not determine what information is true or false. That is the right of the people. Now, in fairness to Tim Walz, in context, he was talking about a specific type of false claim, though. False claims about an election.
Tell the truth where the voting places are, who can vote, who's able to be there.
Whether you have a constitutional right to lie about election places and times and methods is legally more of a gray area, but they are going after it as part of the Biden DOJ's legal crackdown on speech in new and exciting ways. Of course, they convicted Douglas Mackey for exactly that. Memes in 2016 that said vote for Hillary by text. Regardless, even if Walz was talking about a specific type of false information that is being prosecuted, that was not the limit of his commentary in both cases. The debate this week and his MSNBC segment in 2022, Walz wasn't speaking strictly about election lies. He added more. He said you have no constitutional right to hate speech. And that, of course, is categorically false. Hate all you want. Have as offensive an opinion as you want, because your viewpoint is at the core of the First Amendment's protection, not according to me, but according to the Supreme Court, over and over again. In Brandenburg v. Ohio, the case that established the current test for when speech crosses from opinion into the incitement of imminent crime, Clarence Brandenburg, an actual KKK guy, gave a speech about his hatred for blacks and Jews, dropping several hard RNs. Brandenburg's conviction was overturned because his hate speech was constitutionally protected, slurs and all. And more recently, the Supreme Court affirmed so-called hate speech protection in a 2017 case about trademarking a potentially racially derogatory term. Writing for a unanimous court, Justice Alito said, quote, "The idea that the government may restrict speech expressing ideas that offend strikes at the heart of the First Amendment. Speech that demeans on the basis of race, ethnicity, gender, religion, age, disability, or any other similar ground is hateful, but the proudest boast of our free speech jurisprudence is that we protect the freedom to express the thought that we hate." So Walz saying openly, you have no right to hate speech, is making Vance's point. This is a guy who apparently believes that government is entitled to control your opinion. And if there was any remaining impression that this guy even understands the First Amendment's Supreme Court case law, forget actually defending it, Walz erased that with his next point.
I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
No, that is not the test. First of all, that quote was dictum, as in commentary in a Supreme Court decision long ago, not the holding, as in the legal conclusion of the case. Second, Walz didn't even characterize the quote correctly. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater ever? What if the theater is actually on fire? That's why the Supreme Court decision he's referencing describes falsely shouting fire in a crowded theater. What if you yell it and nothing happens and nobody cares? That's why the decision describes causing a panic as a necessary component. But the particulars of that quote aside, much more importantly, the overall logic of that decision was bunk. It was a bad decision that hasn't been legal precedent since the 60s. It was overturned by the aforementioned Brandenburg decision, which restrained the applicable test to the incitement standard, and appropriately so, because the case that Walz is citing upheld criminalizing core First Amendment speech, criticism of and protest against the government. In that fire in a crowded theater case, the Supreme Court upheld the conviction of a socialist whose crime was distributing leaflets urging men to resist the draft and to refuse to fight in World War I. That was a criminal violation under the newly signed Espionage Act. So lock up the peacefully protesting socialists, Tim Walz says, at least indirectly. Does he understand the point that he's making? If he does, and he still makes it, well, the guy's an aspiring tyrant. If he doesn't understand it, then why is he even on this stage seeking an oath to protect and defend something he doesn't even get? Well, to get out of this one, Tim Walz reverts to the strategy that nobody should look for in a leader: deflection of responsibility. Hey, don't look at me. I'm just some knuckle-headed non-expert raising the question of why anyone should vote for him if others are more knowledgeable and qualified.
And I'm a knucklehead at times. You made a question about experts, said this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted.
But if you don't like the censorship, hey, don't blame me. After all, I don't run Facebook.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't wear masks.
Senator, the governor does have the floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to respond to you.
Yeah, well, I don't run Facebook.
Except that's the problem. The White House did run Facebook effectively. They established direct communication channels, not just by the lawsuit allegations, but again, by Jen Psaki's public description, to coordinate to remove content the White House didn't like. And at the end of August, Mark Zuckerberg confirmed the White House pressured his company to remove users' content at their whim. And Zuck regrets complying with it. So Walz doesn't even understand the policies and practices of his boss either. And without anything else to counter Vance's point, Walz just returns to the original one. Yeah, but January 6th.
I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this, I'm pretty shocked by this, he lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world.
It literally is a debate, actually. In fact, you're standing on a debate stage right now. But anytime anybody, but especially somebody in or aspiring to government power, says this is not a debate, they've lost. They have earned your mockery, not your vote. Everything is a debate. And the most hardened truths we have were discovered, established, and remain defended by debate. If the point is so obvious and true, then debate does not threaten it. It strengthens it. What Walz is saying is that some truths are just declared by an authority. They aren't discovered by exploration, and therefore these special ideas get our obedience, not our scrutiny. And in the biggest sense, I actually do think there's a lot of truth to that. If there is an objective reality to the world, then there must be some source or author of it. But what or who is that source? Is it Tim Walz and Kamala Harris and the rest of the expert gang of better-thans? Or is that God himself? Because give any people, but especially these people, godlike information control and authority, indeed, the claim to the source of the truth itself. And the irony is we will create exactly the sort of emergency circumstances that were the original point. There will be lots of fires in crowded theaters to yell about, metaphorical or literal, and a government boot to stomp you out instead of the flames. Sorry, but shouting is strictly prohibited. You and your entire society will cook in silence. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on X, that is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chatting my live streams. Those are live on Wednesday and Sunday nights. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.